Okay, hi everyone. So for homework, I had you read chapters 23 and 24 from Fearless Writing, Finding Evidence and Evaluating Sources about the research process. And today what I want to do is summarize the key concepts from those chapters and also provide you with some resources for the digital form assignment that's coming up. So before I get into the presentation, I just want to say that I had originally made this presentation to give to other UTAs so that they could teach their students about the research process. So if you see any funny language in here, like make sure your students know how to find sources or anything like that. Don't be alarmed. And I figured that I would give you guys this presentation in the form that it was already in because it has a whole bunch of really good resources that I think that you guys will find useful for your research moving forward. So from the chapters, I'm sure that you all recognize that the research process itself is very long and complicated. And for this presentation, I've decided to split it into two major parts, finding sources and engaging sources, and some smaller parts beneath that. And moving forward, I just want you guys to keep in mind these two acronyms, RUDE and ACE, and they will help us um, guide the process through finding sources and engaging sources. So first up, we have finding sources. And the acronym that I've developed for this part of the research process is RUDE. And RUDE stands for recording sources, understanding sources, discovering new sources, and evaluating those sources. Um, and so first we're going to look at recording sources. And on this slide, what I've done is I've just linked a whole bunch of relevant links to style guides for MLA and APA. And let me navigate over to some of those pages. The first link is just the MLA introduction, the MLA style guide introduction. In English 101, we use MLA. So this is going to be really valuable for you guys. And the links that I think that you should focus the most on, the first is the in-text citations page, as well as the um, citation page format. And the thing that I really like about OWL Purdue is that it tells you how to make citations for a wide range of sources. So from books to journal articles to videos. And it also tells you how to make citations in a whole bunch of unique cases. So if there's one author, multiple authors, an author with a pen name, no author, it gives you the instructions for how to make citations for all of these different kinds of sources. So you can find pretty much anything that you need on OWL Purdue. And the other thing that I would recommend that you guys use on this site in particular is the MLA sample paper. When you're putting the finishing touches on your paper, making sure that it's structured correctly, I would recommend using the sample paper as essentially a checklist to make sure that you have your paper formatted correctly for MLA. And it gives you, all the details you need, font, um, font size, spacing, where each of the components of the paper should go. And this is a really great resource that even I still use after submitting major assignments. Um, Other resources that I think are very helpful are the University of Maryland WorldCat website for our library. If there's a book or a journal that we have available at the library, you can use this website to automatically create a citation for you using the cite button right here. And I would also recommend using EasyBib. I think EasyBib is great. I know some people don't like it, but I personally think it's fine. And the only thing I'm going to warn you guys about is for EasyBib and even for the University of Maryland website, sometimes when you make your citation, it will incorrectly, um, make the citation. So make sure you're always double checking these so that everything is correct. But I think that for just getting together your sources initially, both of these are really good resources. So let me jump back into the presentation. And the next thing that we're going to look at is understanding sources. And this is what the U in RUDE stands for, understanding. And the big takeaway here is that there are three main types of sources: primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. So primary sources are things like raw data, speeches, diaries, maybe even photos. And primary sources are what are used in order to make secondary sources. And secondary sources are things like commentaries, journal articles, critiques, things like that. And secondary sources are the things that are used to make tertiary sources, which are things like meta-analyses, reviews, encyclopedias, things like that. So for example, for the rhetorical analysis, you guys were using primary sources, speeches, in order to create a secondary source. You were making a commentary or an analysis on that primary source. And for the digital forum, you guys are going to be using secondary sources. So you're going to be using other people's analyses and commentaries in order to create a tertiary source, kind of compiling all of these things and reviewing them all. When you're doing your research for the digital forum, I would recommend looking mostly for secondary sources. Looking for tertiary sources is usually not productive to your own analysis, but sometimes it's nice when you're just looking for background information. And the next thing that we're going to look at is discovering sources. This is what the D in RUDE is for, discovering. And I know that you guys just had your library workshop, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse, but I would recommend that you use Pat Heron's research guide for the English major. Let me pull that up really quick. This is a really great resource if you're doing any kind of research, and I think she makes it very clear how to use the different databases that are available at UMD. And then one thing that I'm going to recommend to everyone is to download this plugin, the Reload at UMCP plugin, which you can find in the off-campus access to e-journals part of the toolbar over here. And what this tool does is, for those of you that don't know, when you're on the campus Wi-Fi, you automatically gain access to all of the journals that the University of Maryland is subscribed to for free. But when you're not on the UMD Wi-Fi, you lose that free access unless you use this plugin. And the way that you use this plugin is, and the instructions to download it are right below, right on this page. So I've put it in my Chrome right here. So let's say you find an article that you want to look at, but only the abstract is available, the full text isn't available. What you can do is you can just click the Reload at UMCP plugin, and it will prompt you for your credentials at UMD. And then after that, you will be able to access the full text. And this is super useful if you're home for a weekend, or maybe if you're working on a project over the summer, something like that. So I would recommend everyone just to download this now before you forget that it's something that's available to you. Okay, and then the last thing is evaluating sources. This is the last step of the finding sources part of RUDE. And to evaluate your sources, there are two main dimensions that I think you should look at, and that is relevance and reliability. Both of these are pretty self-explanatory, but for relevance, I would recommend that when you're looking at a source's abstract, just count the number of keywords that are related to your topic that you're researching about. And the more keywords appear, the more relevant that source likely is to your research. And then you can just put that into EasyBib and drop it in your bibliography to come back later. The other thing you want to look at is reliability. And when you find a source that is relevant to your topic, you might also want to do a quick Google search on both the publisher as well as the author, and just make sure that they both have good credentials, especially in the field that your research is about. So that's everything related to finding sources. And now we're going to move into engaging sources. And for engaging sources, the three things that we're going to be looking for are agreements, contradictions, and evidence, or ACE. So the first thing is agreements. And for agreements, there are three main ways to look for agreements. Namely, that is offering additional support, confirming unsupported claims, and applying a claim more widely. If you want more detail on this, you can go back to chapter 24 in Fearless Writing. But for me, the key takeaway is when you're looking for agreements, simply look for ways that evidence from one source supports claims from another source. And that's a really clean, easy way to look for agreements between two or more sources. The next thing to look for is contradictions. And there are 5 ways, well, there's really 5 contradictions that you can look for. And those are contradictions of a kind, part-whole contradictions, developmental contradictions, cause-effect contradictions, and contradictions of perspective. Again, you can go back to chapter 24 if you want to get a little bit more in detail. But for me, the key takeaway is exactly the opposite of agreements. Simply look for ways that evidence from one source contradicts the claims from another source. And finally, the last thing that you want to look for is the strength of the evidence being used in a source. There's a lot of different kinds of evidence that we see in sources. Usually the weakest kind that we see is anecdotal evidence or evidence from experts. I think that the ethos that comes from experts is usually very strong rhetorically, but it's not always the strongest evidence, the strongest concrete evidence, right? So just make sure that the evidence in the source, is strong, is reliable. You can always fact check it, and make sure that the evidence holds up to scrutiny. And so that's everything for this presentation that I have for you. So I'll just run through it one more time. So in the research process, there are 2 major parts, and those are finding sources and engaging sources. And when you're finding sources, you can use the acronym RUDE to remember each of the steps for finding sources. And those are recording the sources, and you guys can use the OWL Purdue style guides to help you with that. Understanding your sources, just remembering the 3 kinds of sources: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Then discovering sources, use the resources that you have available from the University of Maryland. Use Google Scholar if that's what you like to use. And from me personally, I would recommend downloading the Reload at UMCP plugin. And the last thing is evaluating sources, and just check the sources' relevance to your topic, as well as the reliability of the author and the publisher. Once you've found a bunch of sources that you think might be good for your research, then you can start engaging those sources to start narrowing them down. And to remember the steps of engaging your sources, you can use the acronym ACE. And ACE stands for agreements, contradictions, and evidence. For agreements, look for ways that the evidence of one source supports the claims of another source. And for contradictions, look for ways that the evidence from one source contradicts the claims from another source. And finally, for evidence, just take a hard look at the strength of the evidence that's being used in the sources that you are analyzing for your research. Make sure that that evidence is strong, holds up to scrutiny, and that you think you can make a good argument with it. So that's everything that I have for you guys. Feel free to refer back to this video whenever you need to. Also, you can find this PowerPoint with all of the embedded links in the class files on Elms. And you guys can just download this and use it. I think that it's not only useful for the digital forum coming up, but for other, like the position paper as well. And you can use this even for your other classes. I think that most of the information in here will be relevant to a lot of the research that you guys will be doing at your time at UMD. And if you need any other help with research, you're more than welcome to schedule an appointment with Professor Joshi or any of the UTAs. And also remember that you can schedule an appointment with one of the librarians at McKeldin, and that's a really good resource for you guys to use too. So thanks so much for watching. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you guys in just a few days.